"This is the woman I always wished had been my mom," said my son Jeffrey. "My name is Veronica Parker. I'm 68 years old, and I just sat through the most painful sentence I've ever heard my son say. We were at my grandson's first birthday party. Everyone was gathered around, smiling, laughing, glasses raised. My son Jeffrey was giving a toast, and then, with that same proud smile I used to see when he'd win a Little League game, he said, "Janice will be the only grandmother my son ever knows. Not one of the grandmothers. Not alongside me. The only one." I felt the words land in my chest like a brick. Janice, his stepmother, is married to my ex-husband. She's been in Jeffrey's life for a few years, and I've kept my distance. Not because I disliked her, but because I knew my place. I raised my son alone for 30 years after his father left. Every scraped knee, every school project, every Christmas morning, that was me, not Janice. I looked around the room to see if anyone noticed. Nobody did. People were clapping, laughing, clinking glasses. Jeffrey's wife, Candace, beamed at him. Janice was dabbing her eyes with a napkin like it was the sweetest thing she'd ever heard. I felt my hands trembling under the table. My sister Ruth, sitting beside me, gave me a small pat on the leg. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. We've always been able to read each other. The party was at one of those country clubs just outside Raleigh. White tablecloths, tall floral centerpieces, champagne flowing. Candace's parents were hosting, and it was clear they wanted everything to look perfect. Most of the guests were from her side, business associates, old college friends, neighbors from their gated community. My side of the family was small. Just Ruth, her husband, and me. Jeffrey stood at the head of the room in a crisp navy suit, his arm around Candace, the baby on her hip. I watched him laugh and shake hands with people I didn't know, looking every bit the polished young professional. He didn't glance my way once. I took a slow sip of water, then set my glass down. My throat felt tight. I pushed my chair back quietly and slipped out the side door onto the balcony. The evening air was warm, with a faint smell of freshly cut grass from the golf course. The sun was starting to set, painting everything gold, but it didn't make me feel any better. I gripped the railing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I've always been realistic about the fact that life changes. Kids grow up, get married, build their own families. I never expected to be at the center of Jeffrey's world forever. But hearing him erase me in one sentence, in front of all those people after everything we'd been through, that was something I couldn't have prepared for. 30 years of being his only parent, 30 years of sacrifices I never complained about. I didn't date much because I didn't want him to feel like he was second to anyone. I took on extra shifts at the hospital to pay for his college. I skipped vacations, skipped nights out, skipped buying things for myself. Also, he could have every opportunity. And now, in one toast, I was gone. Replaced. I thought about the first time I held him in the hospital. His tiny fingers curled around mine, his eyes opening just enough to meet me. I thought about the times I'd stayed up all night when he had the flu, the afternoons I'd sat in the bleachers in the cold, watching him play ball, the evenings we'd eat takeout on the couch while he told me about his day. That was our life. That was our bond. And now, apparently, it wasn't worth mentioning. A part of me wanted to walk back in there, pull him aside, and ask him what in the world he thought he was doing. But I didn't. I stayed out on that balcony, staring at the perfect green grass below, letting the hum of voices from inside fade into the background. It wasn't anger I felt in that moment. It was something colder, clearer, like a window opening after years of being shut. I knew right then that something had shifted between us, and it wasn't going to shift back. I had never been one for making big, rash decisions. But standing there, I felt the pieces fall into place. The truth was simple. If my own son could cut me out of his child's life so easily, then maybe it was time I stopped pretending the bond between us was unbreakable. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and turned to head back inside. I wasn't going to cause a scene. That's not who I am. But I also knew that what happened tonight would not be forgotten. Not by me. I didn't leave the party early. I went back inside, smiled when people looked my way, and clapped at all the right moments. But inside, my mind had already drifted back through the years to the life Jeffrey and I built together when it was just us. It all started when he was 2 years old. His father left one Thursday afternoon without much of a conversation. He packed 2 suitcases and said he wasn't cut out for family life. That was it. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor after he drove away, Jeffrey playing with blocks next to me, not understanding that our lives had just changed forever. I was 28 with a toddler, a small apartment, and a job at the local hospital as a respiratory therapist. The pay was steady, but not enough for extras. I picked up every overtime shift I could get, nights, weekends, holidays. I learned quickly how to sleep in short bursts and still show up smiling for Jeffrey. Mornings were always ours. I'd make oatmeal or scrambled eggs before walking him to daycare. Some days I'd tuck a little note in his lunchbox, just a smiley face or, "I love you," so he'd know I was thinking of him. After work, I'd scoop him up, and we'd stop by the park or sit on the couch with picture books until bedtime. I didn't have the luxury of being tired in front of him. Teaching him to ride a bike was one of my favorite memories. We lived in an apartment complex with a quiet parking lot. I'd run behind him, holding the back of the seat, until one day I let go without telling him. He made it halfway across the lot before realizing it, and the look on his face, surprise, then pride, was worth every scrape and bruise we patched up over the years. School projects were another story. Jeffrey had a way of picking the most complicated topics. There was the time in 4th grade when he decided he wanted to build a working volcano for the science fair. I spent 2 nights helping him paint the mountain and rig up the baking soda and vinegar mixture so it would erupt just right. We didn't win, but we got an honorable mention, and he was beaming when he brought the ribbon home. I didn't date much during those years. Not because no one asked, but because I couldn't risk bringing someone into Jeffrey's life who might leave. Every time I thought about it, I pictured him forming an attachment only to have another man disappear. I wasn't going to let that happen, so my focus stayed on him. Money was tight, especially around the holidays. Christmas mornings were simple, a tree with hand-me-down ornaments, a few wrapped gifts, and cinnamon rolls I'd bake while he opened them. One year, all he wanted was a second-hand guitar we saw at a yard sale. I went back the next day, bought it, and hid it in my closet for weeks. The way his face lit up when he saw it under the tree, that's the kind of joy you can't buy with a big paycheck. As Jeffrey got older, sports became his thing. Football in the fall, baseball in the spring. I was at every game, rain or shine, sitting on those cold metal bleachers with a thermos of coffee. I yelled myself hoarse more than once when he made a good play. Those fields became our second home. The other parents knew me as the mom who never missed a game, even if I came straight from a 12-hour hospital shift. When college applications came around, Jeffrey worried about loans. I told him not to. All those years of extra shifts and careful budgeting had added up. I'd opened a savings account for his education when he was 5 and never touched it except to add more. The day we paid his tuition in full, without borrowing a dime, was one of my proudest moments. He hugged me so hard I could hardly breathe and said, "Mom, I owe you everything." I told him he didn't owe me anything. That's what parents do. We had our arguments, of course. The teenage years tested my patience. There were slammed doors, curfews broken, and a few questionable friends I had to nudge out of his life. But no matter how tense things got, we always came back to the table and talked. I made sure he knew he was loved, even when I was disappointed in his choices. After he graduated high school, we took a trip to the beach, just the two of us. It was the first real vacation we'd ever had. We walked along the shore, talking about his plans for the future. He told me I was his best friend. I remember thinking that even if I never had anyone else, I had him, and that was enough. Through his college years, I was still the first phone call when something went wrong. Flat tire? Call Mom. Bad grade? Call Mom. Heartbreak? Call Mom. I liked being that person for him. I thought it meant our bond was unshakable. Looking back now, I realize I built my whole life around being his mother. Every decision I made, where to live, how much to work, what to spend money on, was tied to giving him stability. I never resented it. In fact, I was proud of it. I believed it would matter to him as much as it mattered to me. That's why standing on that balcony at the country club, hearing him call Janice the only grandmother his son would know, cut so deep. It wasn't just a careless comment. It felt like he'd taken all those years, all those sacrifices, and quietly swept them off the table. I thought about the nights I'd sat by his bed when he had a fever, holding a cool cloth to his forehead. The mornings I'd woken up early to iron his shirt for a job interview. The times I'd bitten my tongue instead of saying, "I told you so," when life proved me right. I thought all of that added up to something that couldn't be erased. Apparently, I was wrong. When the party finally ended, I said my polite goodbyes, hugged Ruth, and walked to my car. Driving home, I kept replaying that sentence in my head. The only grandmother. Over and over, like it was etched there. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew I wasn't going to be able to just brush this off. Something had changed between us that night. And whether he realized it or not, the choice of what happened next was no longer just his. I pulled into my driveway and sat today. The house was quiet. I made tea and let my mind drift to the first time I heard the name that would change how holidays felt. Jeffrey met Candace in grad school. He called one night buzzing. "She's smart, Mom. Steady. We want the same things." I told him I was happy and meant it. He deserved a partner who respected him. I also knew how new love can rearrange a family. We met at a restaurant near campus. Candace had a handshake and eyes. She asked about my work and listened. When she stepped away, Jeffrey leaned in. "Don't overthink it. She's good." I nodded. Soon he talked about her family. Her mother, Janice, sat on boards and ran charity events. Their home had a wide porch and a perfect lawn. At a cookout there, Janice hugged me and called me dear. She showed me where to set the salad and introduced me around. At first, it seemed fine. Janice asked for baby stories and laughed at the right places. But small comments piled up. "You did all that on your own? That must have been a challenge." Or, "Isn't it wonderful he finally has a big family around him?" The words were polite. The tilt in them kept me a step outside the circle. Time started to split. Thanksgiving that year, Jeffrey said he would start at Candace's parents' house and swing by mine after dessert. He arrived late, full of food, and showed me photos of their long table. I told myself not to fuss. Christmas brought 2 invitations sent in unequal ways. A gold-lettered card from Janice for Christmas Eve. A text from Jeffrey asking if I could host a small Christmas morning. I baked cinnamon rolls and kept it quiet. He opened gifts, checked the time, and left with thanks. I stood in the doorway and promised not to pout. Mother's Day told the truth. I had booked a table at my favorite diner weeks ahead. The night before he called, "Mom, can we move brunch?" Candace's family planned something, and I messed up the times. I said, "Of course." I ate with my sister Ruth and took home a slice of pie I bought myself. It wasn't the food. It was the message. I had become the flexible plan. Calls shifted too. When he needed advice, he reached me fast. When I called to chat, it often went to voicemail. He would text, "Busy day. We'll call tomorrow." Tomorrow drifted. At gatherings, there were little things. Someone asked who taught him to grill. Janice answered first. "He learned in our kitchen," she said. He nodded. People can learn in more than one kitchen. I reminded myself. When I brought a casserole, it went to the far end of the buffet. Maybe random. Maybe I noticed because my feelings were tender. I told myself they were a young couple juggling a lot. New jobs, new circles, future plans. I adjusted. I waited for him to call, so he wouldn't feel managed. I shortened my messages. When they invited me, last minute, to a 4th of July party, I went. Janice complimented my blouse, then turned to plan a fundraiser. One afternoon, Jeffrey suggested alternating Thanksgiving to keep things balanced. I said I understood. On paper, it made sense. In practice, I ate turkey with Ruth and sent Jeffrey a photo of pie captioned, "Save room next year." He tapped a heart and promised. Summer blended into fall. Text threads started without me and ended with me added at the end. "Oh, and Mom, if you're free." Afterthoughts are still invitations, I told myself, and I showed up with a gift. The seating chart never placed me near the center. I watched how Jeffrey brightened when Janice praised him. I speak plain. Maybe that difference mattered more than I knew. When the baby was born, I brought casseroles, folded tiny laundry, and slipped out before I was in the way. Janice posted photos about our growing family. I clicked like and kept my thoughts to myself. I loved holding him. I also felt new lines on the map. The first birthday planning happened on a group text I never saw. A week before, Jeffrey sent a short message with the time and address. I bought a toy and a book and pressed my dress. I told myself to go, smile, and leave with dignity. Standing on the balcony later, I knew the shift hadn't started that night. It had been slow to excuse. Busy seasons are real. So are patterns. I had tried to explain it away as life. But life does not usually erase. People do. Back home after the party, I set my keys in the bowl and sat at the table where I once helped glue a volcano. I set a legal pad down and wrote, "Decide what respect looks like now." I didn't know the next steps yet, but I knew I would take them with a clear head and a steady hand. After the party, I didn't sleep much. I sat in my recliner, lights low, staring at nothing. The words from Jeffrey's toast were still there, like they'd been carved into the inside of my mind. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. It wasn't an idea that came out of anger. It came out of a kind of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. Years back, when Jeffrey turned 21, I had set up a trust fund for him and any children he might have. It wasn't something I talked about to many people. Most of it came from decades of saving, a few smart investments in rental properties, and a small inheritance from my Aunt Lydia when she passed. I'd always believed that part of being a good parent meant setting your child up for stability. The total was $1.5 million, enough to make a difference, but not so much it would ruin his work ethic. I wanted him to have a safety net, not a hammock. When I sat in my lawyer's office all those years ago, we talked about the details. Martin O'Connor had been my lawyer since I bought my first home. He'd seen me through a divorce, handled property closings, and had a knack for telling me what I needed to hear even when I didn't like it. That day, after I told him what I wanted for Jeffrey, he leaned back in his chair and said, "We should include a family respect clause." I remember laughing. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," he said, that if your son ever publicly disrespects you, cuts you out of major family events, or fails to maintain a meaningful relationship, you have the right to redirect the funds elsewhere. It's a safeguard. I waved him off. Martin, there's no way Jeffrey would ever do that. I raised him better than that. I believe you, he said, but people change. Spouses, in-laws, business pressures, they all have a way of shifting priorities. I've seen it more times than I care to count. I signed the papers anyway, mostly to humor him. I didn't think that clause would ever matter. It felt like locking a door in a house with no burglars for miles. But after the party, sitting at my kitchen table, I pulled open my desk drawer and took out the folder marked Trust, Jeffrey. The papers were exactly where I'd left them. I spread them out in front of me and started reading. Every number, every stipulation. The family respect clause was in plain black print, not hidden in legal jargon. If the beneficiary publicly disavows, disrespects, or excludes the grantor from meaningful family roles or events, the grantor reserves the right to revoke the trust, in whole or in part, and reassign it to another beneficiary. The words couldn't have been clearer if they'd been underlined in red. I thought about the setting at that party. A microphone, 100 people in the room, my son looking out over the crowd, then saying Janice would be the only grandmother his child would ever know. That wasn't a slip of the tongue at a private dinner. That was a public statement, and not just in passing. It was deliberate. I set the papers down and rubbed my temples. The decision wasn't really about the money. It was about the fact that he'd stood in front of friends, family, and strangers and erased me in favor of someone who had been in his life for a handful of years. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Martin had been right. People do change, and sometimes the person you raised becomes someone you don't quite recognize. I went into my home office and pulled out the key to the fireproof safe where I kept other important documents. Inside was my will, property deeds, and a few personal letters I'd never mailed. I put the trust papers in a neat stack on top and closed the safe again. Then I sat back at the desk and thought about what would come next. The clause gave me options. I could redirect the funds to anyone I chose. That could be my godson Caleb's daughter, Nora, a bright, respectful teenager who never forgot my birthday and called me just to chat. Or it could go into a scholarship fund for kids from single-parent homes. It was strange. In that moment, I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel like I was getting revenge. I felt like I was finally drawing a line after years of letting small things slide. I had built that trust over decades, not just the money, but the trust in my son. He broke one of them. The other was mine to control. I closed the folder, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen window, watching the street outside. A couple of kids were riding bikes, the way Jeffrey used to when we lived in that small apartment complex. I remembered running behind him, steadying the seat, letting go when he was ready. It struck me then that maybe I'd been holding on to more than I should have for far too long. Maybe it was time to let go again, not of him as my son, but of the idea that he would always treat me the way he used to. By the time I rinsed out my cup, I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next step was calling Martin. The morning after I reread the trust papers, I picked up the phone and called Martin O'Connor. We'd known each other for more than 30 years, so I didn't have to explain who I was when he answered. "Martin, it's Veronica. I need to come in today, if you can fit me in." He must have heard the weight in my voice. "Come at 11. We'll talk." By the time I walked into his office, the air outside was already warm. Martin's office hadn't changed in years. Dark wood desk, shelves lined with law books, and the same framed photo of his fishing trip to the Outer Banks. He stood, shook my hand, and motioned for me to sit. "What's on your mind?" he asked. I set the folder with the trust papers on his desk. "I want to enforce the respect clause." He didn't touch the folder right away. Instead, he studied me. That's a serious step, Veronica. Once we start, you can't just change your mind without consequences. It will change how your son sees you, maybe permanently. I met his eyes. He already changed how I see him. He stood in a room full of people and acted like I didn't exist. This clause was put in for a reason, and now it applies. Martin nodded slowly. Tell me exactly what happened. I told him about the party, about the toast, about the words, "Only grandmother," coming out of Jeffrey's mouth with Janice smiling beside him. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. When I finished, Martin tapped his pen against the folder. Yes, that's a clear violation. Public statement. Exclusion from a family role. It fits. I'm not doing this out of spite, I said. He needs to learn that family isn't something you rewrite for convenience. I raised him alone for 30 years. I was there for every moment. If he can erase me that easily, then I have no obligation to keep this trust in his name. He leaned back in his chair. So, where do you want it to go? I didn't hesitate. To Nora, Caleb's daughter. Martin's eyebrows lifted. Your godson's girl? Yes, she's 16 now. Polite, hardworking, never forgets to call me on my birthday. She's been like a granddaughter to me. If anyone will appreciate the help, it's her. Caleb would have wanted that. Martin nodded. All right, we'll draw up the transfer. It will include a full statement of the violation and the redirection. I'll also add language making it airtight in case Jeffrey tries to contest it. I felt lighter just hearing him say it. Good. I want it done right. I'll have papers ready in 2 days. He said, once you sign, I'll have them served at Jeffrey's house. I took a breath. Serve them. Don't email. I want him to hold the papers in his hands. Martin looked at me for a long moment. This will shock him, Veronica. I'm sure it will. But I've been shocked too. The difference is, I'm not trying to undo what's been said. He meant those words. Now he can live with the result. He slid the folder back to me. I'll need you to bring an identification and sign in person. And one more thing. Are you prepared for his reaction? He may get angry, say things you don't want to hear. I thought about it. I've already heard the worst thing he could say. Anything else is just noise. We talked through the technical details, timelines, filing procedures, and what would happen if Jeffrey ignored the notice. Martin promised the process would be quick, but thorough. As I stood to leave, he said, "You're not the first parent to do this, you know." I looked back at him. Does it ever get easier? He shook his head. No, but sometimes it's necessary. On the drive home, I thought about Nora. I pictured her face when she found out. Not because of the amount. She wouldn't even understand how much it was yet, but because she'd know I trusted her with something important. I also thought about Jeffrey's face when the papers arrived. I imagined him opening the envelope, reading the first page. Realizing this wasn't a warning, it was a decision. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt settled. This wasn't about punishing him. It was about setting a line and keeping it. 2 days later, Martin called. Papers are ready. Come by to sign. I went to his office, read every word, and signed on the last page with a steady hand. All right, he said, gathering the documents. I'll have them served this afternoon. I nodded. Thank you, Martin. That night, I sat in my living room with the TV on low. I knew it wouldn't be long before my phone rang. And when it did, I'd be ready. This time, I wasn't going to back down. The papers were served on a Thursday afternoon. I knew the time because I had asked Martin to make sure they went out when Jeffrey was likely to be home. It didn't take long. Less than an hour after they were delivered, my phone lit up with his name. I answered. Hello, Jeffrey. Mom, what is this? His voice was sharp, the kind of sharp that's part anger, part panic. Some guy just came to my door with legal papers saying you're taking away the trust fund. What's going on? It's exactly what it says. I replied. You violated the terms. I'm enforcing the clause. That's insane. You're really doing this over one toast. One public statement. I corrected. In a room full of people where you said Janice would be the only grandmother your son will ever know, that's not a slip of the tongue, Jeffrey. That's erasing me. He let out a short laugh that wasn't amused. I didn't mean it like that. I was just trying to honor Janice's role. She's been great with the baby. And I'm glad she's good to him, I said, but you could have honored her without making it sound like I don't exist. I raised you alone for 30 years. I worked 2 jobs. I gave up more than you'll ever know to make sure you had everything you needed. That moment, in that room, you acted like none of it mattered. Mom, come on. No, I cut in. You don't get to brush it off as just words. Words matter. You chose them. You said them. Now you live with what they mean. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted. The edge of panic was there now. Do you realize the trust distributions are built into our budget? The mortgage, the childcare, Candace and I planned around that. This is going to wreck us. That's not my problem, I said calmly. The trust was a gift, not a guarantee. I can't believe you do this, he said. Candace's parents are going to hear about it. This kind of thing gets around. Their business can't afford the bad press. I'm sure they'll manage. I told him. You should have thought about all of that before you made me a non-person in my grandson's life. Mom, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm following the agreement we both knew existed. You didn't respect it. This is the result. He sighed hard. So that's it? You're just done? No chance to fix this. I don't see how you fix erasing me from my grandson's life in front of everyone you know. I said, you can apologize until you're blue in the face, but I can't unhear it. I can't unsee how comfortable you were saying it. There was another long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, like he was weighing whether to shout or try another approach. Look, he said finally, I'll make a public statement. I'll tell everyone I misspoke. We can act like it didn't happen. Just don't do this. I'm not interested in damage control for appearances. I told him. I'm interested in respect. And if I have to demand it by holding on to my own money, then so be it. His voice got tighter. You know Candace is going to be furious. Her family will take this as a personal insult. They're welcome to take it however they want, I said. My decision isn't about them. It's about you and how you treated me. So, you'd rather give it to someone else? Yes, I said, to someone who treats me like family, not like an inconvenience. Nora will appreciate it, and she won't pretend I'm not part of her life. Unbelievable, he muttered, after everything I've done for you. I cut him off. Jeffrey, don't start. I'm your mother. I changed your diapers. I sat through your school plays. I paid your tuition without loans. I stood in the rain at your football games. I did for you what no one else would. You don't get to spin this into how much you've done for me. There was silence again. I think he knew that line of argument wasn't going to work. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. So it's final? Yes, I said. The papers are signed. The transfer is in motion, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. He made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. You've changed. No, I said. I just stopped ignoring what's been right in front of me. He didn't reply. After a few seconds, the line went dead. I set the phone down and sat back in my chair. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I felt steady. It was the kind of steady that comes when you know you've done exactly what needed to be done. I had drawn the line, and I wasn't going to move it. Would you forgive someone who erased you in public and then called it just words. If your answer is no, like this video and make sure you're subscribed. If your answer is yes, go tell me in the comments and explain how you'd live with it. It didn't take long for the pushback to start. A week after the papers were served, Ruth called me first thing in the morning. "Veronica," she said, "I just had the most ridiculous conversation with one of Jeffrey's old high school friends. He told me he's heard you're losing your memory." I sat up in bed. "What?" He said, "Jeffrey mentioned you've been confused lately and making decisions that don't make sense. Said you're being manipulated by Caleb's family." I felt my stomach drop. "So now he's trying to make it sound like I'm not thinking clearly?" "That's exactly what it sounds like," Ruth replied. "And I think he's been saying it to more than one person." Later that afternoon, my neighbor Elaine came by with her tablet in hand. "I don't know if you want to see this," she said, "but I think you should." She pulled up a private Facebook group for local parents that she belonged to. There, in black and white, was a post from Candace. She hadn't used my full name, but it didn't take much to figure out who she meant. She wrote about a senior family member who had suddenly made irrational financial decisions and was being influenced by people outside the family who wanted access to her assets. She asked the group for advice about what to do when you suspect elder exploitation. The comments were full of sympathy for her, strangers suggesting elder abuse hotlines, legal guardianship, even calling adult protective services. I scrolled through them in silence. Elaine said quietly, "I thought you should have a copy before it gets deleted." I thanked her and sent the screenshots straight to Martin. I didn't need to explain. The images spoke for themselves. He called me within the hour. "This is defamation, Veronica. She's making specific claims about your mental state and accusing other people of manipulating you. It's damaging to your reputation and could cause you legal trouble if someone takes it seriously." "Then let's do something about it," I said. "I'll start preparing a defamation case." Martin replied, "We'll include every screenshot and any witnesses who've heard these claims in person. This isn't just about protecting you. It's about stopping them from pushing the story any further." The next few days were a blur of gathering information. Ruth wrote a statement about what Jeffrey had said to his old friend. Elaine signed an affidavit about the Facebook post. Caleb even offered to talk to Martin directly about the fact that I had been handling my own affairs just fine for years, with no sign of mental decline. While we worked on that, the rumors were already seeping into Jeffrey's professional life. He co-owned a small marketing firm with 2 partners, and word travels fast in business circles. One of his clients, a mid-sized construction company, quietly pulled their account. They told one of the partners they didn't want to get mixed up in any messy family disputes that could distract from their marketing campaigns. Another client put a major project on hold without explanation. By the end of the week, his firm had lost 2 contracts worth enough to make the partners nervous. I heard all of this from Ruth's son, who works in the same business district. "People are saying he's dealing with family drama," he told me. "That's never good for business." I didn't smile when I heard it. I wasn't rooting for Jeffrey to fail, but I couldn't ignore the irony. The very thing he and Candace were trying to do to me was starting to turn back on them. Martin filed the initial paperwork for the defamation suit. It spelled out exactly what had been said, where it was posted, and how it was untrue. We asked for a public retraction and damages. "They'll likely try to deny it or say it was misunderstood," Martin warned. "But the more they push, the more we'll put into the record. This could get uncomfortable for them." "That's fine," I said. "I'm past the point of worrying about their comfort." Over the next week, the silence from Jeffrey was deafening. No calls, no texts. I didn't reach out either. The only updates came from Ruth, who kept hearing whispers from mutual acquaintances. "He's telling people you've been spending more time with Caleb's family than your own," she said one day. Like that's supposed to prove something's wrong with you. I spend time with people who treat me like I matter. I told her, if that's a crime, I'm guilty. In a strange way, the more they tried to paint me as unstable, the more resolved I became. I'd been steady through worse storms in my life. And now I had the truth and the law on my side. Martin called me on a Friday afternoon. They've been served with the defamation suit. He said, I expect you'll hear from them soon, either directly or through a lawyer. Don't respond to anything yourself. Let me handle it. I agreed. I had already decided there would be no backroom deals, no quiet handshakes to make this go away. If they wanted to drag my name through the mud, we were going to settle it where the facts mattered. And as for Jeffrey's business, that was now out of my hands. But I had a feeling the storm he'd started was far from over. It was Martin who told me the court filings had gone public. Just so you know, he said, the paperwork for the trust transfer and the defamation suit are now part of the public record. If anyone looks, they'll see it. 2 days later, the local paper's business section ran a short column. It wasn't a front-page story, but in a town like ours, it didn't have to be. The headline read, Local Marketing Executive Faces Family Trust Dispute and Defamation Claim. They kept it factual, mentioned the trust fund I'd set up for Jeffrey, the Family Respect Clause, and that I'd exercise my right to reassign the funds after a public incident. They also noted that a defamation suit had been filed over statements made about my mental state. It was matter of fact, but anyone reading could put the pieces together. I didn't have to wonder how Jeffrey felt about it. By the end of the week, word was out in his professional circles. His business partners called a meeting without him, wanting answers about how their co-owner had become the subject of a legal dispute that could damage their image. Ruth's son told me one of the partners had been especially blunt. He said no one wants to bring in a marketing firm that can't manage its own public relations. Then came the news that the pending contract with a regional grocery chain, a deal Jeffrey had been chasing for months, had collapsed. The company's leadership cited concerns about stability and decided to go with another firm. Jeffrey must have been feeling the pressure, because that's when Janice showed up at my door. I hadn't seen her in months. She was dressed neatly, polite smile on her face, but there was an edge in her voice when she spoke. Veronica, I think we need to talk about this, she began. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. Jeffrey's business is suffering. Candace is upset. Surely we can come to some kind of agreement before this goes any further. I stood in the doorway. Janice, this is not your negotiation. It's between me and my son. I know, but family should try to work things out, she said. Maybe if you could reconsider the trust decision, we could put this all behind us. I shook my head. The trust is already reassigned. It's not coming back. And the defamation suit is going forward. You don't get to erase what was done with a polite conversation. Her expression tightened. This is going to leave scars, Veronica. It already has, I told her, and closed the door. The defamation case moved quickly. Martin gathered everything. The Facebook post, the statements from Ruth and Elaine, the names of people who'd been told I was losing my memory. Their lawyer called to talk settlement within a month. Martin told me their first offer was a quiet agreement with no admission of wrongdoing. I said no. I wanted a formal retraction in writing and a payment that would actually mean something. 2 weeks later, we had both. The settlement wasn't enormous, but it was enough to make a point. I took the money and, without hesitation, donated every penny to a local scholarship fund for single mothers going back to school. It felt right. That money had come from a lie meant to hurt me. Turning it into something that would help women trying to build a future on their own felt like the best way to answer it. When the settlement became final, I didn't call Jeffrey. I didn't send a message. There was nothing left to say. He knew where I stood. The paper ran one more small update noting the resolution. It didn't dwell on the details, but the headline alone told the story. Defamation case settled following family trust dispute. For weeks afterward, I heard bits and pieces from people who crossed paths with him. Some said he kept his head down at work. Others mentioned Candace stopped posting as much on social media. The noise faded, but the distance between us stayed. And I was fine with that. This wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure my worth wasn't something that could be publicly dismissed without consequence. And now, the message had been sent, not just to him, but to anyone watching. I'd stood my ground, and I didn't regret it. Turning a lie meant to hurt me into something that helps other women. That's a win in my book. If you think more people should hear stories like this, hit share and subscribe. And if you won't, at least say why in the comments so we all understand. 6 months passed before I realized how much lighter my life had become. The constant knot in my stomach was gone. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes for a message that never came. It was a Saturday in late spring when I drove out to the lake for a picnic with Caleb's family. Nora had invited me herself. She'd packed sandwiches, fruit, and her favorite oatmeal cookies. When I arrived, she ran over and hugged me like she hadn't seen me in years, even though it had only been a couple of weeks. We found a shady spot under a big oak tree. The lake was calm, a few fishing boats drifting in the distance. Nora spread out the blanket, then pulled a folder from her backpack. "Aunt Veronica," she said, using the title she'd always given me, "would you help me with my college application essays?" I smiled. "Of course. What do you have so far?" She read me her draft, stopping here and there to ask if a sentence sounded right. I made a few suggestions, but most of it was already good. She wrote about working part-time to save for school, volunteering at the animal shelter, and wanting to study nursing. It wasn't the writing itself that got to me. It was the fact that she trusted me enough to let me into that process. She wanted my opinion. She valued my input. That meant more than she knew. After we finished, we ate our lunch and talked about everything from summer plans to her favorite books. Caleb's wife, Denise, joined in, making sure my plate was always full. They made me feel welcome in a way that didn't have to be earned over and over. At one point, I leaned back against the tree and watched them laugh together. It hit me then, this is what family feels like. Not because we share blood, but because we choose to show up for each other. I thought about Jeffrey. The last I'd heard, he and Candace had moved to another state. A friend told me they were starting fresh somewhere closer to her family. We hadn't spoken since the settlement. There had been no calls for holidays, no photos of my grandson, just silence. And you know what? I had made peace with that. Some people think family is automatic, that no matter what's said or done, the connection should stay the same. But I've learned that respect and loyalty are choices, not obligations. If someone chooses to erase you, you have the right to protect yourself from the damage. I didn't cut Jeffrey out of my life because I stopped loving him. I made the choice because I love myself enough to not accept being treated as if I don't matter. There's a difference. As the afternoon went on, Nora walked down to the edge of the water and skipped a few stones. Denise and Caleb cleaned up the picnic things. I stayed under the oak tree, letting the breeze wash over me, thinking about how far I'd come since that night at the country club. It wasn't the ending I thought I'd have with my son, but endings are just part of the story. The rest is what you choose to build next. I've built something real with people who care, people who remember my birthday without Facebook reminding them, people who ask my opinion because they respect my experience, people who show up without expecting anything in return. And that's when I realized blood might start the connection, but it doesn't guarantee the bond. Sometimes the people who choose you are worth more than the ones who are supposed to. So let me ask you this. What would you do if the child you raised erased you in public? Would you let it slide to keep the peace? Or would you stand your ground, knowing it might change everything? It's not an easy question. I know that, but it's one worth thinking about because the answer says a lot about what you're willing to accept and what you're not. If you've been through something like this, I'd like to hear your story. Share it. It might help someone else who's sitting where I once was, wondering if they should speak up or stay quiet. And if this story made you think, please like, share, and leave a comment. I'd love to know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because life has a way of writing stories we never expect, and sometimes the only way through them is together.